The wind howled through the hollow streets of Hollow Creek as the sun dipped behind the red cliffs, bleeding orange fire across the sky. The crowd gathered near the trading post, dust swirling around boots and broken dreams. It wasn't every day a woman was put up for trade in this forgotten edge of the frontier, but tonight, the air was thick with tension and whispers. Evelyn Marrow stood on the wooden platform, wrists bound loosely in front of her, chin held high despite the shame that burned behind her eyes. 30 years old and once the proud wife of a rancher, she now looked like a relic of a life stolen too soon. Her brown hair, streaked with sun-faded gold, brushed against her weathered face. She wasn't some timid girl. She had lived through fire, famine, and betrayal. Yet nothing could have prepared her for being sold. "Gentlemen," barked Silas Kree, the auctioneer, a man with eyes cold as spent bullets. This fine lady was part of a debt unpaid. The Marrow estate owes $3,000, and the bank don't wait on widows. A murmur swept through the crowd. Men with whiskey on their breath and greed in their eyes leaned forward, curious. Evelyn's heart thudded painfully as she looked out into the faces, searching for mercy. Finding none, she had once been loved, truly loved, by a man who died defending his land from raiders. When he fell, everything collapsed. The ranch went to creditors, the house to flames, and she to debt. But fate, it seemed, had one more cruelty to offer. A tall figure stepped from the edge of the crowd, wrapped in a tanned hide cloak, hair black as raven feathers that brushed his shoulders. His presence silenced the jeers. His dark eyes glimmered with something that wasn't greed or lust, something deeper, unreadable. "Kaelen," whispered someone from the back. "That's one of them Apache from the White Mesa band." The auctioneer stiffened. "You got coin, savage?" Kaelen didn't answer with words. He untied a leather pouch from his belt and tossed it at Silas's feet. It jingled heavy gold by the sound of it. The crowd gasped. That's more than the debt," Silas stammered. Kaelen nodded once, slow. His voice, when he finally spoke, was deep but calm. "I'll take her." Evelyn froze. The crowd erupted. Curses, laughter, disbelief. "He wants to buy her?" one man shouted. "She never lasts a night," another barked. But Kaelen said nothing. He simply extended his hand toward her, not to grab, but to invite. The sheriff looked uneasy but nodded toward the auctioneer. "The debt's cleared, Silas. Transaction's done." And just like that, Evelyn Marrow, widow of Hollow Creek, was sold to an Apache no one knew for reasons no one understood. Kaelen led her away from the light of the town, past the stables, into the wild where the canyon swallowed the last of daylight. His stride was steady, his silence powerful. Evelyn's fear churned beneath her breath, but so did curiosity. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why buy me?" Kaelen stopped at the edge of the ridge. The wind caught his long hair, and he turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You are not for owning," he said simply. "You are under my protection." Evelyn frowned. Protection? From what? He looked toward the horizon, where Hollow Creek's lights flickered faintly in the distance. "From the men who would treat you as less than what you are." His words struck her harder than she expected. No man had spoken to her like that since her husband died. Still, confusion battled with fear. "Then why buy me?" she demanded. Kaelen's gaze softened. Just a flicker, but enough. "Because they would have hurt you. Because sometimes gold is the only language evil men understand." Silence stretched between them. The desert night thickened around their shadows, stars spilling over the black sky like spilled salt. Evelyn realized her wrists were no longer tied. She hadn't even noticed him cut the rope. She rubbed the faint red marks, eyes glistening. "So what now?" she asked quietly. Kaelen looked at her, his voice low, carrying a gravity that made her chest tighten. Now you come to my people. They will not harm you. You will see why I came." Evelyn turned to glance one last time at Hollow Creek, the town that had chewed her up and sold her soul. Then she followed him into the darkness, unsure if she was walking toward safety or into the arms of another kind of danger. But in her heart, one thought pulsed quietly. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The desert night had swallowed them whole by the time Hollow Creek vanished behind them. The only sounds were the creak of Kaelen's horse and the whisper of wind brushing against dry sage. Evelyn Marrow sat behind him, her fingers lightly gripping the saddle, unsure if she should hold tighter or let go completely. Every jolt sent her heart fluttering, not in fear anymore, but in confusion. Kaelen had said nothing since they left town. His silence was heavy but not cruel. It was the kind of silence born of thought, not neglect. Evelyn found herself studying the back of his shoulders, broad, strong, lined with scars that glimmered faintly under the moonlight. Whoever this man was, he had lived through battles that would have crushed others. Finally, unable to bear the quiet, she asked, "You said I'm not for owning. Then what am I to you, Kaelen?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowed his horse, guiding it toward a shallow stream under a cluster of cottonwoods. The air was cooler here, and the sound of running water broke the silence between them. Kaelen dismounted first, then turned, offering his hand to help her down. "You are someone who deserves choice," he said simply. Evelyn blinked. "Choice? I haven't had that in years." Kaelen's expression softened as he gathered twigs for a small fire. "Then perhaps it is time you remember what it feels like." They sat near the fire, its glow painting their faces in gold and shadow. Evelyn's mind kept racing back to the auction, to Silas Kree's smirk, to the sheriff's cold indifference. The humiliation had cut deep, but here, in the open wild, she began to breathe again. Kaelen noticed her trembling hands. "You fear I will harm you," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Wouldn't you, if you were me?" He nodded once, understanding. "Fear is not weakness. But I will not touch what is not freely given." The words struck her like thunder in the still night. She stared at him, unsure whether to trust or doubt. "You're different," she whispered. Kaelen's gaze lifted to the stars. "Among my people, a woman is sacred, not to be bought, not to be broken. But men like Kree," his jaw tightened. "They trade souls as if they were cattle." Evelyn looked into the fire. "He took everything. My land, my name, my dignity." Kaelen's hand brushed against the hilt of his knife, the firelight glinting off the blade. "Then I took you from him to return what he stole. Not property, but self." For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert hummed softly. Crickets, wind, distant coyotes. Then Evelyn whispered, "You said we're going to your people. Won't they resent me?" Kaelen shook his head. "They will see you as a guest under my word, but they will have questions. They know I have never taken a woman." She studied his face, strong, stoic, but shadowed by something deeper. "Never?" His eyes met hers, calm and honest. "Never." Something in his tone carried both pride and sadness. A man bound by discipline, not by desire. Evelyn didn't know whether to pity him or respect him, perhaps both. Before dawn, Kaelen rose and doused the fire. "We ride early. The white Mesa is still a day away." Evelyn followed, sore from travel but unwilling to complain. The horizon bled pink and orange as they mounted up again. She dared to ask, "What will happen when we arrive?" Kaelen looked toward the rising sun. "You will rest. My mother will give you clothing. You will eat. After that," he paused, "you will decide if you wish to stay or leave." Evelyn frowned. "And if I choose to leave?" His voice was steady. "Then I will escort you safely to the next town." "You owe me nothing." Her throat tightened. "You spent gold for me, Kaelen. Why did this?" He turned to her, the morning light touching his dark hair like a halo. Because I once saw what greed does to a woman's spirit, I will not watch it happen again. Something shifted in her then. A quiet crack in the wall she'd built around her heart dot as they rode on. A shadow appeared in the distance, a lone rider galloping hard from the direction of Hollow Creek. Kaelen slowed, eyes narrowing. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, dread curling in her gut dot. The rider carried the sheriff's badge on his vest. Dust rose behind him like smoke. Kaelen, she whispered, fear creeping back into her voice. They're coming. Kaelen didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, his voice turned calm, almost cold. Then they will learn that I did not buy a slave, he said. I rescued a soul. And with that, he turned his horse toward the approaching figure, ready to face whatever Hollow Creek dared to send after them. The sun rose like a bleeding ember over the desert, painting the dunes in shades of copper and rose. Evelyn Marrow shielded her eyes as Kaelen slowed his horse. The distant rider had grown larger, clearer. It was indeed the sheriff of Hollow Creek. His tan duster flapped in the wind, the silver badge at his chest glinting under the morning light. Kaelen's posture straightened, calm but ready. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. She'd seen enough of the law to know it wasn't justice that rode their way. It was control and often cruelty. The sheriff reined in his horse a few yards away, dust swirling between them. His voice carried that sharp, commanding tone Evelyn remembered all too well. "Morning, Kaelen," he called. "You know what you've done?" Kaelen didn't move. "Paid a debt that wasn't mine," he said evenly. The sheriff's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "Mrs. Marrow, I'm here to bring you back. You belong to the town until the courts decide what happens next." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "You mean until Silas Kree decides," she snapped. The sheriff frowned. "Now don't make this hard, ma'am. That sale wasn't legal, but neither is running off with a native. You're causing a scandal." Kellen's jaw flexed, his tone dark and steady. "She is free. The gold was payment enough for her debt." "That ain't how it works," the sheriff barked. "White woman with an Apache? You'll have the whole town in uproar." Kaelen dismounted slowly. His bare chest gleamed under the rising sun, the tribal jewelry at his throat catching the light. He stood tall, the wind catching strands of his black hair. "If your law values gold more than people," he said quietly, "then your law is already broken." The sheriff's hand hovered over his revolver. "Don't test me, son." Evelyn stepped forward before Kaelen could reply. "No, Sheriff. You tell Silas Kree that if he wants me, he can come himself. I'd rather rot in the desert than serve his greed another day." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "You'll regret those words, ma'am." He's not the forgiving type. He gave Kaelen one last look, a mix of disgust and grudging respect. "I can't fight you out here, not alone. But Kree's men will come. He says she's his property now." Kaelen tilted his head, his voice low as thunder. "Then tell Kree this. The woman he thinks he owns now walks under Apache sky. And under that sky, no man owns another." The sheriff spat into the sand, turned his horse, and rode off in a cloud of dust. Evelyn stood trembling. Her anger had burned so hot, she hadn't realized her hands were shaking. Kaelen looked at her quietly, then turned back toward the trail. "We must keep moving," he said. "He will not return alone." They rode until the sun climbed high, the desert stretching endlessly before them. The heat shimmered on the horizon, and Evelyn's lips cracked from thirst. Kaelen handed her a water skin, his tone gentle. "Drink, we will rest soon." She obeyed, though her mind churned with unease. "Kaelen," she murmured, "you didn't have to stand between me and him." He glanced at her, eyes thoughtful. "Yes, I did. When I see cruelty, I cannot turn away. My father once did, and it cost lives." Evelyn frowned. What do you mean? Kaelen's gaze drifted toward the canyon ahead, his voice quiet but heavy with memory. When soldiers came to White Mesa years ago, they burned homes. My father tried to speak for peace, but he hesitated. They took my sister. He paused. Since that day, I vowed never to be silent again. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. The pain behind his calm, the strength that didn't come from pride, but from scars unseen. And you've lived alone since? She asked softly. He nodded. My people believe purity of body keeps the spirit clear. I've not taken a woman. Not because I don't wish to, but because I have not found one whose spirit matches mine. The words made her chest ache in ways she didn't expect. And you think mine does? She asked, barely above a whisper. Kaelen didn't answer. His silence said enough. As they reached a rise overlooking the valley, Evelyn saw smoke curling in the distance, thin trails rising from a cluster of lodges and tents surrounded by cliffs. The Apache village of White Mesa. Kaelen reined in his horse and nodded toward it. There, he said. My people. They will see you as under my protection. Evelyn stared, awe and fear blending in her chest. And what if they don't accept me? Kaelen's eyes met hers, steady and warm. Then I will make them understand why I brought you. Behind them, a hawk cried out, circling high above the desert. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Silas Kree's fury was already moving their way. But for now, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in years, safety, fragile yet real, beside a man who spoke truth even when silence would have been easier. The ride to White Mesa felt endless. By the time they reached the Apache settlement, the afternoon sun had burned the air dry, and heat shimmered across the red stones like waves. Evelyn Marrow could barely sit upright, her body aching from the journey, but her spirit, somehow, still held strong. Below the ridge she saw them, Kaelen's people. Dozens of lodges made of hides and poles circled around a wide fire pit, smoke curling upward like prayers. Children played near the river, elders sat weaving baskets, and men worked with horses and spears. The scene was alive with rhythm, the pulse of a world she had never known. But when they noticed her, the rhythm broke. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. Kaelen dismounted, motioning for Evelyn to follow. She climbed down carefully, dust clinging to her dress, her heart thudding with unease. A woman stepped forward, tall, with silver streaks in her black hair, her face carved by wisdom and years. Her eyes, sharp and questioning, moved from Kaelen to Evelyn. Kaelen Thunderbird, she said in a low, commanding tone. You return with a white woman. Why? Evelyn looked to Kaelen for help, but he bowed his head respectfully. Mother, he said, she was taken and sold by men who think gold can buy a life. I paid her debt to set her free. The murmurs around the camp grew louder. His mother. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had expected hostility, but not from the woman who had given birth to the man who'd saved her. The elder woman's name, Evelyn soon learned, was Naomi, matriarch of the White Mesa Band. She studied Evelyn with an unreadable expression. And what will you do with her? Naomi asked coldly. The white woman's world takes from ours, always. What makes this one different? Evelyn felt the sting of those words, though she knew they weren't unjust. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the weight of guilt and history pressed too, heavy on her tongue. Kaelen answered for her. She is not like the others, Mother. Her spirit was broken by her own kind. She deserves a place to heal. Naomi's gaze lingered on Evelyn for several heartbeats, then she turned away. If she stays, she works. She eats what we eat, sleeps as we sleep. No privilege. Kaelen nodded. That is fair. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Fair was more than she had been given in Hollow Creek Dot as the day wore on. She was shown to a small lodge near the edge of the village. Kaelen brought her a blanket and a clay cup of herbal tea. "For pain," he said softly, "and for rest." She took it, their fingers brushing briefly, a moment of quiet electricity that neither of them spoke of. Inside the lodge, Evelyn sat on a woven mat, staring at the fire pit in the center. Smoke drifted through the hole in the roof. For the first time in years, she wasn't surrounded by walls of greed or whispers of pity. Just open air, firelight, and the steady drumbeat of tribal life beyond her tent. Outside, she heard the laughter of children, the rhythmic tapping of stones, and the murmur of women speaking a language she didn't know. Yet something about it comforted her, the warmth of belonging she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. Kaelen returned after sunset with food, roasted corn, and venison. "Eat," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "You don't eat?" "I will," he said, sitting across from her. "After you." They shared the meal in silence. The fire cast his face in gold and shadow, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Your mother doesn't trust me," Evelyn said finally. "She doesn't trust easily," Kaelen replied. "When I told her I would never take a woman until I found one with courage equal to heart, she said such a woman did not exist." He paused, eyes meeting hers. Now she questions her words. Evelyn felt her breath hitch. "You think I'm that woman?" Kaelen's lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. "I think time will tell." Outside, the drums began, low, steady, ancient. Evelyn felt them in her chest like a heartbeat. For the first time since Hollow Creek, she didn't feel like a burden or a debt. She felt seen. But as night deepened, a shadow moved along the ridges above the camp. A lone rider paused, watching the firelight flicker below. The sheriff's horse snorted softly, its hooves grinding against the rocks stopped behind him. Another rider approached, Silas Kree himself, his eyes burning with rage and greed. "There she is," Kree hissed. "And the savage who stole from me?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Kree, don't. You'll start a war." Kree sneered. "Then let it burn. She belongs to me." And as the flames of White Mesa glowed below, Evelyn slept, unaware that the men who once sold her were already riding to take her back, by force if they had to. Night had draped White Mesa in shadows, the moon casting pale silver over the lodges and the surrounding cliffs. Evelyn Marrow sat near the fire in her small lodge, the scent of sage drifting in through the open flap. She was tired but restless, thinking of the day's events, the wary stares of Kaelen's people, the quiet moments by the fire, and the way Kaelen had looked at her, protective yet patient. A sudden commotion outside made her heart leap. The rhythmic thud of hooves pounded against the ground, louder, faster, growing closer. Panic rose in her chest. She ran to the flap, eyes widening. Silas Kree and a dozen men were riding hard, torches flaring, guns glinting in the moonlight. The sheriff followed, silent but tense, clearly trying to hold Kree back. Evelyn's stomach sank. Kaelen emerged from his lodge, every muscle taut, his chest gleaming under the moonlight, long black hair whipping in the wind, tribal jewelry clinking softly as he moved. "Stay inside," he commanded, voice low and steady. "Do not come out." Evelyn obeyed, heart hammering, peering through the hide flap as the attackers dismounted. Kree's eyes swept the camp, greed and fury blazing. "She belongs to me," he shouted, raising his pistol. Kaelen didn't run, didn't flinch. He strode into the clearing, bare chest shining, muscles coiled, his eyes locking on Kree. "She is not yours," he bellowed. His voice carried over the desert like rolling thunder. Kree sneered. "She's my debt. Pay up, Apache, or—" Kaelen didn't let him finish. With the speed of a striking panther, he moved, disarming one man before he could fire. The others froze, uncertain against the towering, fearless warrior. Evelyn watched, breath caught, as Kaelen's movements were precise, controlled. He didn't harm unnecessarily. He disarmed, threw, and blocked, protecting his people and her without letting violence consume him. Every motion spoke of restraint, the restraint of a man who had never taken a woman, who fought with honor, not bloodlust. From inside her lodge, Evelyn felt an unfamiliar stirring in her chest, awe, admiration, and a strange, fluttering heat. Kaelen wasn't just protecting her. He was defending the principles she'd longed to see in men her whole life. Kree growled and lunged at Kaelen with a knife, but Kaelen caught his wrist, twisting it sharply and tossing him backward into the sand. The sheriff, still conflicted, held back, watching silently, knowing intervention was useless against the Apache warrior. One by one, Kree's men were disarmed or sent sprawling, their pride bruised, not their lives. Kaelen's restraint astounded Evelyn. Even in battle, there was a code, a boundary he refused to cross. Finally, the attackers retreated, Kree cursing loudly as he mounted his horse. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You'll pay for this, woman." Kaelen lowered his arms slowly, breathing steady. The camp erupted into murmurs of relief. Children peeked from behind lodges, elders exhaled softly, and women moved quickly to secure the fires. Evelyn ran to him, the fear in her eyes mingling with gratitude and something deeper. "Kaelen, you didn't even," she swallowed hard. "You didn't even hurt them more than you had to." Kaelen turned, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "Violence is for survival, not pride," he said softly. "I fight to protect, not to conquer." Her chest tightened. You've never taken a woman before, have you?" He shook his head. "Not because I do not desire, but I have not found a spirit worthy of my heart." Evelyn's eyes filled, emotion she had tried to bury for years bubbling up. "And now, do you think you found one?" Kaelen's gaze met hers, unwavering. "Perhaps." For a long moment, they stood in silence as the desert night reclaimed its stillness. Evelyn realized that her fear, the chains of her past, were slowly breaking. Here, under Kaelen's protection, in a world far removed from Hollow Creek, she felt the stirrings of trust and something stronger, something her heart hadn't dared to name. That night, as Evelyn lay on the mat in her lodge, she could hear Kaelen walking outside, vigilant, alert. But she also heard a rhythm, his steady heartbeat in her mind, a promise that no harm would touch her here. And for the first time since her husband's death, Evelyn Marrow felt safe. But safety was only the beginning. The journey had just begun, a journey into trust, desire, and the delicate dance between a woman learning to let go and a warrior bound by honor, ready to show her what it meant to be truly protected. The aftermath of the attack left White Mesa quiet but tense. Evelyn Marrow sat near the fire outside her lodge, the desert night cool against her flushed skin. Her heart still raced from the adrenaline of the day. She had witnessed Kaelen's strength, his skill, and his restraint, all qualities that marked him as extraordinary. Yet tonight, in the stillness, she felt a new emotion stirring, curiosity and something deeper, an almost unbearable longing to understand the man who had risked everything for her. Kaelen approached quietly, his bare feet silent against the sand. His chest and arms glowed faintly in the firelight, tribal jewelry shimmering as he moved. He carried a water skin and a small bundle of cloth. Without speaking, he knelt beside her and handed her the water. She took it, their fingers brushing lightly, sending an electric thrill up her spine. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Kaelen said softly. His voice, deep and calm, carried an intimacy that made her heart clench. "I wasn't alone," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were out there, protecting me." He nodded, eyes never leaving hers. It is my vow. I do not take life unnecessarily. I do not harm what is not mine to harm. And I protect those under my word. Evelyn's throat tightened. Your word. It's like a promise. Kaelen's lips curved faintly. A promise I intend to keep. They sat in silence for a long moment, the desert wind carrying the soft sounds of the village. Then Evelyn dared to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since she arrived at White Mesa. Kaelen, you've never taken a woman before, have you? He shook his head slowly. Not because I do not desire, because my people teach patience, because I have sought a woman whose spirit matches my heart. Until now, I have not found her. Her heart skipped. And now? Do you think you found her? He leaned closer, his eyes dark and serious. Perhaps, he said, his voice a whisper. If you are willing to trust me. Evelyn felt warmth flood her chest. She wanted to speak, to deny her feelings, to remind herself of the past betrayals and dangers, but something in his gaze held her captive. Something gentle yet commanding. Something that told her she was seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Kaelen spread the cloth on the sand, motioning for her to sit. Tonight, you rest here. I will not disturb, but I will not leave your side. If you awaken, I will be here. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She obeyed, sitting as instructed, the bundle covering her legs. She watched Kaelen move around the fire, tending to its glow, adjusting the logs, and finally sitting beside her with his back to the flames, shielding her from the cold desert night. For hours they sat silently. The only sounds were the distant river, the rustle of leaves, and Kaelen's steady breathing. Evelyn's mind wandered to Hollow Creek, to Silas Kree, to the death that had sold her, and then she returned to Kaelen, the man who had risked everything to rescue her. Finally, she spoke. I don't understand. Why me? Why risk yourself for a stranger? Kaelen turned, his expression serious. Because men like Kree are everywhere. They take what they think they can own. They break spirits. I have seen enough cruelty in my life to recognize it, and I cannot ignore it when I can act. Her chest ached at the sincerity of his words. You could have left me, Kaelen. Gone back to your tribe. He shook his head. And leave you to them? That is not my way. Silence fell again, but it was no longer tense. It was a silence of connection, of shared understanding. Evelyn felt the first sparks of trust, fragile, but real, ignite between them. As the night deepened, Kaelen shifted closer, offering the warmth of his presence without pressing beyond her comfort. Evelyn felt her breath catch, the anticipation of intimacy building not through force, but through respect, patience, and shared vulnerability. She began, unsure, I've never felt protected like this before. Kaelen's hand brushed hers, gentle and grounding. Then let tonight be the first night you know safety. Let it be the first night you remember that not all men seek to own. Evelyn nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She felt her barriers, forged from years of betrayal and fear, begin to crumble. And for the first time, she allowed herself to lean into his presence, into the warmth, the strength, and the honor of the man who had saved her life, body, and spirit. Outside, the village slept. Inside, a quiet bond was forged, not through possession, but through trust, respect, and the unspoken promise of a future neither had dared to hope for. And for Evelyn Marrow, under the moonlit desert sky, the first night with Kaelen was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Tender, electrifying, and breathtaking in its restraint and devotion. The first light of dawn crept over the cliffs of White Mesa, painting the desert in soft shades of rose and gold. Evelyn Marrow awoke to the gentle warmth of Kaelen's presence beside her, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm that had become familiar overnight. For the first time in years, she had slept without fear. Without trembling at the thought of men like Silas Kree, Kaelen stirred and opened his eyes, meeting hers with a calm intensity that made her heart flutter. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice low and steady. Evelyn smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning," she replied. There was a softness in her voice that had not been there in Hollow Creek, a softness born from trust and something else, something daringly new. Kalen's gaze softened. "You are safe here," he said, "and you are free to choose your path. No one will take that from you." She nodded, the weight of his words settling over her like a shield. I want to stay," she admitted. "Not because I must, but because I want to." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Kalen's lips. "Then you will stay." They stood and walked to the edge of the village where the morning sun warmed their skin. The Apache people were stirring, tending to the horses and fires. Evelyn felt their eyes on her, but the looks were no longer wary. They were measured, respectful. She realized that she was no longer the outsider, the object of a cruel auction. She was a guest under Kalen's protection, a place in this world she had never imagined she could belong. The day passed slowly but peacefully. Kaelen introduced her to his mother, Naomi, who studied Evelyn carefully before nodding in quiet approval. "She has courage," Naomi said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "And she respects our ways." "That is enough." Evelyn bowed her head, gratitude and relief mingling in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Evening approached, and a distant dust cloud caught Evelyn's attention. Silas Kree and the sheriff were riding toward the Mesa again, but Kaelen did not flinch. He stood tall, muscles taut, eyes steady, a wall of protection that made Evelyn feel invincible. Kree reined in and shouted, "Kaelen, you can't hide her here. She's mine by law." Kalen's voice carried over the canyon, calm yet unyielding. "She is no one's property. She is free, and she will remain here as long as she chooses." The sheriff looked uneasy, realizing he had no power over the Apache warrior's code or the will of his people. "This isn't over," Kree spat, frustration twisting his features. "I will find a way." Kaelen did not respond. He simply motioned for Evelyn to step closer. "Let them see that your choice is yours alone." Evelyn drew a deep breath and lifted her chin. "I will not go back to Hollow Creek," she said firmly. "I am done being a pawn in their games. I choose to stay here with Kaelen under his protection." Kree's fury burned hot, but the sheriff stepped forward, reluctantly holding him back. There was nothing they could do. Kalen's people had gathered silently, forming a protective circle around the village. The law of the land could not penetrate the law of honor and loyalty that Kaelen represented. Seeing his men's resolve, Kree finally turned his horse, muttering threats as he disappeared into the horizon. The sheriff followed, casting one last wary glance back before retreating as well. Evelyn exhaled, relief flooding through her. Kaelen wrapped his arm around her waist, steady and reassuring. "It is over for now," he said. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "No, Kaelen, it's the beginning." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and softened even his stern features. "Then let us make it a good beginning." As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson, Evelyn Marrow finally felt whole. She had survived cruelty and injustice, but now, in the heart of White Mesa, she had found safety, honor, and most unexpectedly, love. Kaelen led her to the lodge where a new fire awaited, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn allowed herself to rest without fear, knowing that the man beside her would honor her spirit, her choice, and her heart. And under the vast, open sky of the Apache lands, a woman once sold at an auction now stood free, cherished and unbound, her future no longer dictated by greed or violence, but by love, respect, and the man who had stolen her breath and given her life back.